I want to talk to you about a word. A word that many serious historians, including some of the world's leading experts, are now using to describe what's happening in America. A word that makes some people uncomfortable. A word that others think is an exaggeration. Fascism. I understand why that word provokes resistance. For many of us, fascism is inseparable from the Holocaust, from the industrial murder of 6 million Jews. Using it for anything else can feel like a trivialization, a disrespect to that unimaginable horror. And for a long time, I've also been hesitant to use this word. As a historian, I know how it gets thrown around carelessly. But in the last few months, I've changed my mind. And I want to explain why. In this video, I'll make the case, carefully and precisely, based on what leading historians and scholars are telling us, that yes, we can call what's happening in America fascism. And more importantly, why we must. Let me first acknowledge that there is no single definition of fascism. If you ask 10 scholars, you'll get 10 slightly different answers. Robert Paxton is probably the greatest living historian of fascism. He's now in his 90s. Paxton spent his whole career being careful with the label and has long resisted applying it to Trumpism. When a lot of pundits started calling Trump a fascist in 2016, he pushed back. Paxton worried that the F word was being used too loosely, that it had become, as he put it, more heat than light. But then came January 6, 2021. Paxton watched the mob storm the Capitol. He watched the violence, the Confederate flags, the gallows erected for Vice President Mike Pence. He looked at his television and was immediately reminded of Mussolini's black shirts marching on Rome in 1922 and of the fascist riot at the French Parliament in 1934. That day, the careful, cautious historian, the man who'd spent 60 years warning people not to overuse the F word, changed his mind. The invasion of the Capitol, he wrote a few days later, removes my objection to the fascist label. The label now seems not just acceptable, but necessary. When a journalist asked him about it again, Paxton was even more direct. It's bubbling up from below in very worrisome ways, and that's very much like the original fascisms. It's the real thing. It really is. So how do we identify fascism if there's no precise definition? The philosopher of language, Ludwig Wittgenstein, had a really useful concept: family resemblances. Think about what brothers and sisters, uncles and aunts have in common. Not everyone has the same nose, but you see the same eyes here, the same chin there, enough overlapping similarities that you recognize them as part of the same family. And that's how fascism works. Italian fascism looked different from German Nazism, but they shared enough traits that we can recognize them as the same species. And what scholars have done is identify the key traits, the family resemblances that fascist movements share. Now, I don't mean to be exhaustive here, but let me walk you through 10 of the most important ones. Here are the fascist traits that we can clearly see and that make what's happening now different from normal authoritarianism. First, a mythic past and national rebirth. Every fascist movement invokes a golden age that has been lost and must be restored. Make America Great Again isn't just a slogan. It's the very structure of fascist thought. It posits a time when the nation was pure, strong, uncorrupted, before it was betrayed by, in Trump's words, the enemy from within. Fascism promises that the old order will be torn down so that something pure can rise from the ashes. Second is victimhood and humiliation. The fascists claims that the dominant group, the real Germans, the real Americans, is the victim of a vast conspiracy. They're being replaced, attacked by elites, by globalists, by immigrants, and this victimhood demands revenge. The emotional engine of fascism is humiliation. The burning sense that we have been disrespected, that our rightful place has been stolen. Or, as Trump said,
I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
Third is hierarchy and dehumanization. Fascism divides the world into those who belong and those who don't, an us versus them based on ethnicity, religion, or nationality. Some people are citizens, others are illegals, aliens, or even vermin or cockroaches. Trump has called immigrants animals who are poisoning the blood of the nation. J.D. Vance wrote a glowing recommendation for a book titled Unhumans, a title that refers to the left. And once you define people as less than human, you have prepared the ground for treating them as such. Fourth is the contempt for weakness. Fascists worship strength. They believe that life is trouble, that the strong should dominate, and that compassion is decadence. According to fascists, the nation has been feminized, made soft and weak. It must be hardened again. Or, as Stephen Miller recently said to Jake Tapper on CNN,
we live in a world, in the real world, Jake, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world that have existed since the beginning of time.
Now, this leads to a fifth family resemblance, which is the cult of action. For fascists, thought is weakness. Deliberation is paralysis. Real men take action. This slow, boring work of democracy with its committees and procedures and compromises is cast as perverse. Just get it done. Cut through the red tape. Fascism demands the triumph of the will. Sixth is the leader as savior. In a healthy democracy, leaders are servants of the people, constrained by law and accountable to voters. But in fascism, the leader is something else entirely. A mystical figure who alone embodies the nation's will. I alone can fix it, as Trump said. Now, this isn't just narcissism. It's a structural feature of fascist politics. The leader's personal grievances become national grievances. His enemies become the nation's enemies. To oppose him is to oppose the people themselves. Seventh is the purification of institutions. In fascist regimes, loyalty to the leader becomes the only qualification that matters. Expertise is suspect. Independence is dangerous. The civil service, the military, the universities, all must be cleansed of those insufficiently devoted to the movement. And this is why fascism experts were not surprised by the mass firings, the loyalty tests, and the dismantling of agencies that might serve as checks on power. It is exactly what you would expect when fascism is taking over. Eighth is the propaganda and the assault on truth. Fascists are known to flood the public sphere with lies. So many lies that people give up trying to distinguish fact from fiction. Journalists become enemies of the people. Universities are defunded. Scientists are silenced. Anyone capable of exposing the lies must be discredited or destroyed. The goal isn't to convince people of a particular falsehood. It's to exhaust them, to make them give up on the very idea that the truth is knowable. Ninth is the merger of state and corporate power. In its hunger for power, fascism usually builds an alliance with big capital. Industrialists funded Mussolini's rise. The German dynasties behind Volkswagen and BMW didn't just tolerate the Nazi regime, they merged with it. And so it wasn't surprising to see tech oligarchs like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk in the front row at Trump's inauguration. This isn't ordinary lobbying or corruption. It's structural fusion, the same bargain the industrialists made in 1933. Now, 10th, final, and most crucial is the violence and the terror. Historical fascism was never just an ideology. It was men in uniforms beating people in the streets. Mussolini had his black shirts, Hitler had his brown shirts. Now, these paramilitary squads didn't just protect the movement, they were the movement. Look at what ICE has become. Federal agents in tactical gear dragging people from their homes, masked men snatching students off the streets, tear gas deployed next to cars with infants inside, citizens and non-citizens alike treated as enemies in occupied territory. ICE's budget is now larger than that of most of the world's militaries. Their opening hundreds of new detention centers and recruiting thousands of new agents. Once you have such an enormous infrastructure of state terror, the fascist imperative is to use it. For fascists, violence is the ultimate form of action. It purifies, it cleanses, it restores the nation's honor. And of course, it carries a coded message. You could be next. And this is why the violence is so public, why it's filmed and shared. The cruelty is the point. Now, I want to be clear about something. Fascism in America in the 21st century isn't just about Trump. It doesn't come from one man alone. It always comes from a movement. To repeat Paxton's words, it bubbles up from below. But here's a question worth asking. Why now? America has always had authoritarian tendencies. It has always had racism and nativism and demagogues. So why did fascism crystallize into a movement that could take power in 2025 when it couldn't in 1995 or in 1935? Historians emphasize that fascism emerges under specific conditions. It needs democratic deadlock, a sense that the institutions have failed and cannot be fixed through normal means. It needs elite fear of the left, conservatives so afraid of progressive change that they're willing to ally with radicals. It needs economic dislocation that leaves people feeling abandoned by the system, and it needs a critical mass of people who feel that their status, their identity, their very way of life is under existential threat. All of these conditions exist in America today. I'm talking about a political system paralyzed by polarization and a media ecosystem that has fractured shared reality, about a left that has been successfully portrayed as an existential threat to traditional America, about decades of wage stagnation while the super rich capture nearly all the gains, and about immigration and changing demographics that have triggered profound anxiety among many Americans about their place in a changing nation. Now, here's what I want you to take away from all this. If you've been feeling shocked by what's happening, if every new headline fills you with fresh disbelief, then I understand. But I want you to stop being surprised. Not because you should accept it, not because it's normal, but because once you see the pattern, you stop being caught off guard. You stop expanding valuable energy on shock and start directing it toward resistance. When Robert Paxton studied fascism, he emphasized that it doesn't arrive with a manifesto and a plan. Fascists say whatever they need to say to gain power. Their contempt for doctrine, as Paxton put it, means they'll contradict themselves constantly. What matters isn't the words, it's the pattern of behavior. And the pattern is unmistakable now. The mythic past, the propaganda, the violence, the list of family resemblances keeps getting longer. In his classic 1998 paper, The 5 Stages of Fascism, Paxton argued that fascism is not just an ideology. It's also a process that moves through 5 stages. Fascism begins with intellectuals lamenting national decline, with talk of lost greatness and betrayal. Then comes the movement, exploiting polarization and deadlock to break onto the national stage. Then the arrival to power, often because traditional conservatives, more afraid of the left than of the fascists, invite them in. And then the exercise of power, where the leader bends the state to his will while bargaining with the old elites like the generals and the billionaires. And then, finally, comes the last stage. Either radicalization, an endless escalation as in Nazi Germany, or entropy, a slide into ordinary authoritarianism as in Mussolini's Italy. We are currently in the 4th stage. The movement has come to power. The leader is bending the state and the billionaires are making their bargain. So if this is fascism, real fascism, not an insult, but a clinical diagnosis, then what does history tell us about how it ends? Usually badly, through war or through slow decay over decades. But it has been stopped, and understanding the pattern is the first step. I'm not saying we should all start shouting fascism. That's not an effective political strategy. In 2024, Kamala Harris made democracy her closing argument. even though for swing voters, it was a low priority compared to affordability. So naming fascism isn't about messaging, it's about urgency. It means we should be bloody serious about winning the next elections, because we may not get another chance. That means no more purity tests on the left. That means building broad coalitions that can actually win. It means supporting what the data shows works, organizations that steer scarce resources towards the most cost-effective interventions. I'll put a link in the description. And I'll be honest, the window is narrow. Even if Trump loses the next elections, we can be sure that the next insurrection will be better organized than the one on January 6th, 2021. But when we see the pattern, we can stop being surprised. And when we stop being surprised, we can start being useful.